The taste of ash filled my mouth as I stared at the burning wreckage. He was gone. They said it was an accident, a tragic oversight, but I saw the smirk on her face, the almost imperceptible nod to my stepfather. My world dissolved into a haze of crimson and smoke, a portrait of betrayal painted on the canvas of my life. They thought they had silenced me, broken me beyond repair. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own blood, the people who swore they would protect you forever, subscribe and join our family. My name is Samantha, and until recently, I believed in the unwavering bond of family. My mother, Carol, remarried when I was 10 to a man named Richard. He wasn't the warm, supportive father figure I'd always dreamed of, but he provided a comfortable life. We moved into his sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, a place that felt more like a gilded cage than a home. My brother, Michael, and I tried to adjust, clinging to the hope that things would eventually feel normal again. Michael was always my protector, my confidant. He saw through Richard's carefully constructed facade of generosity. He warned me to be careful, to not trust too easily. But I was young, and I wanted to believe in the possibility of a happy family, even if it was a little unconventional. Richard showered my mother with expensive gifts and lavish vacations, creating an illusion of a perfect marriage. He extended that generosity, albeit superficially, to Michael and me, funding our education and ensuring we had every material comfort we could desire. But beneath the surface of luxury, a subtle tension simmered. Richard always treated Michael differently. He saw Michael's skepticism as defiance, his protectiveness of me as a threat. As the years passed, Richard's control over my mother intensified. Carol, once a vibrant and independent woman, seemed to fade into the background, her voice growing softer, her opinions mirroring Richard's. I tried to talk to her, to remind her of the strong woman she used to be, but my words seemed to bounce off an invisible shield. She was caught in his web, blinded by the allure of wealth and security. Michael and I grew closer, our shared unease solidifying our bond. We spent hours talking in hushed tones, dissecting Richard's manipulative tactics, trying to understand his motives. We knew he was isolating Mom, slowly cutting her off from her friends and family, but we felt powerless to stop it. It was after Michael started seeing through some of Richard's shady business dealings that everything truly changed. Michael began asking questions, digging into the family finances, and suddenly, his accidental death occurred. I saw my mother's face at the funeral, the vacant stare, the complete lack of emotion, and that was when I truly knew. The day I received the invitation to dinner, a week after Michael's passing, a cold dread washed over me. It was a formal affair, held in the grand dining room that always felt too large, too impersonal. My mother and Richard sat at opposite ends of the mahogany table, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of grief and suspicion. They started with polite inquiries about my well-being, feigning concern for my emotional state. Then the tone shifted. Richard began to subtly mock Michael, dismissing his concerns about the finances as youthful naivete. My mother joined in, echoing Richard's sentiments, her voice devoid of any warmth or affection for her deceased son. I sat there stunned as they dissected Michael's life, reducing him to a series of flaws and failings. It was a calculated attack, designed to break me, to silence any lingering doubts I might have about the official narrative of Michael's demise. The person I trusted most was one of them. The silence that followed was deafening. I remember pushing back from the table, the legs of the chair scraping against the polished floor, the sound amplified in the oppressive atmosphere. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. The betrayal was a physical blow, a crushing weight on my chest. I fled the room, stumbling through the echoing halls of the mansion, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of my mother and Richard. I locked myself in my room, the only sanctuary I had left, and sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. The grief for Michael was a raw, gaping wound, now compounded by the realization that the people who were supposed to love and protect me were capable of such cruelty, such calculated deceit. Sleep offered no respite. Night after night, I was tormented by nightmares, vivid replays of Michael's final moments, distorted by shadows and whispers. I saw his car veering off the road, the flames engulfing him, his face contorted in a silent scream. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the taste of ash still lingering in my mouth. During the days, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, attending classes, completing assignments, but my mind was always elsewhere, consumed by the need to understand what had happened, to uncover the truth about Michael's end. I started retracing his steps, revisiting the places he had frequented, talking to his friends and colleagues, piecing together the fragments of his investigation into Richard's business dealings. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Michael had stumbled upon something dangerous, something that Richard was desperate to keep hidden. There were whispers of shady investments, of offshore accounts, of deals that skirted the edges of legality. Michael had been getting close to exposing Richard, and that was why they silenced him.
I tried to talk to my mother, to reason with her, to show her the evidence I had gathered, but she refused to listen. She was completely under Richard's control, her mind poisoned by his lies and manipulations. She dismissed my concerns as paranoia, accusing me of being delusional, of trying to tarnish Richard's reputation. Her unwavering loyalty to Richard was a shield, deflecting any attempts to penetrate her carefully constructed reality. I realized then that I was alone. I couldn't rely on my mother. I couldn't trust anyone in that house. I was on my own, facing a powerful and ruthless enemy. The weight of it was crushing. I started experiencing panic attacks, sudden surges of anxiety that left me gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. The world seemed to close in around me, the walls of the mansion pressing down, suffocating me. I felt trapped, isolated, and vulnerable. I knew I couldn't stay there, not any longer. But I also knew that if I left, I would be abandoning Michael, leaving his end unresolved. I couldn't do that. I owed it to him to uncover the truth, to bring his tormentors to justice, even if it meant putting myself in danger. I decided to stay, to play along, to pretend that I accepted their version of reality while secretly plotting my revenge. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Richard was a cunning and manipulative man, and he had the resources to protect himself. But I was determined to outsmart him, to use his own arrogance against him. I began to observe him more closely, studying his habits, his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. I learned his routines, his schedules, his secret meetings. I started documenting everything, recording conversations, gathering evidence, building a case against him. I knew that one wrong move could expose me, putting me in grave danger, but I was willing to take the risk. The thought of Michael, of the injustice he had suffered, fueled my determination. I would not rest until I had avenged his end. I smiled. I acted broken, but I was recording everything. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. I lived a double life, outwardly compliant and obedient, inwardly seething with rage and plotting my revenge. I continued to attend classes, to maintain the facade of a normal life, but my focus was always on Richard. I watched him, I listened to him, I learned his secrets. One evening, while Richard was away on one of his business trips, I decided to search his office. I knew it was a risky move, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to find more evidence. I waited until my mother was asleep, then quietly slipped out of my room and made my way to Richard's study. The door was locked, but I had anticipated that. I had managed to obtain a copy of his key from his jacket pocket a few weeks earlier. I carefully inserted the key into the lock and turned it, the mechanism clicking softly. I held my breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and old leather. Richard's desk was a chaotic mess of papers, files, and electronic devices. I started sifting through the documents, carefully examining each one, searching for anything that could implicate him in Michael's end or his illegal activities. I found invoices for suspicious transactions, copies of offshore bank statements, and emails that hinted at corrupt deals. The deeper I dug, the more damning. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of excitement and fear. I was getting closer to the truth, but I knew that I was also playing a dangerous game. Amidst the files, I found a small locked metal box. My heart pounded against my ribs as I fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling. After several attempts, the lock clicked open, revealing its contents, a stack of photographs and a USB drive. The photographs were of Michael, taken in secret, documenting his meetings, his phone calls, his every move. They were surveillance photos, confirming my worst fears. Richard had been spying on him. The USB drive was unlabeled, its purpose a mystery. I quickly copied the contents of the drive to my laptop, then carefully placed everything back in the box, making sure to leave no trace of my presence. As I was about to leave, I heard a noise outside the door. My blood ran cold. I froze, listening intently. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching the study. I panicked, my mind racing, searching for a place to hide. There was no time to escape. I dove under Richard's desk, squeezing myself into the small space, my heart pounding in my ears. The door creaked open, and Richard entered the room. I could see his shoes through the gap under the desk, his polished leather loafers gleaming in the dim light. He walked over to his desk and sat down, his chair swiveling slightly. I held my breath, trying to remain as still as possible. He began shuffling through the papers on his desk, humming softly to himself. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I could feel my muscles cramping, my body aching from the awkward position. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, Richard got up and left the room, closing the door behind him. I waited a few more minutes to be sure he was gone, then crawled out from under the desk, my legs shaking, my body covered in sweat. I rushed back to my room, my mind reeling from what had just happened. I had narrowly escaped detection, but I knew that I had to be more careful. Richard was becoming suspicious.
Back in my room, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and began to examine its contents. It was filled with financial records, contracts, and other documents related to Richard's business dealings. As I delved deeper, I discovered a complex web of fraud, money laundering, and corruption. Richard was involved in some seriously shady activities, and Michael had been getting close to exposing him. I found emails detailing Richard's plan to silence Michael, to make his end look like an accident. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. I had proof that Richard had ended my brother. The rage that had been simmering inside me for months finally erupted. My vision blurred, the glass in my hand shattered. I screamed, a primal sound of anguish and fury, a sound that echoed through the empty halls of the mansion. I wanted to destroy everything, to tear down the walls, to obliterate Richard and my mother from the face of the earth. But I knew that I couldn't let my emotions consume me. I had to remain calm, to focus on my plan. Revenge was a dish best served cold. I spent the next few days poring over the evidence, organizing the documents, and preparing to expose Richard. I knew that I couldn't go to the authorities. Richard had connections, influence. He would be able to bury the evidence, to manipulate the system. I had to find another way, a way to bypass the legal channels and bring him to justice in the court of public opinion. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. One evening, my mother came to my room. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face etched with worry. She sat down on the edge of my bed and reached for my hand. "Samantha," she said, her voice trembling, "I know things haven't been easy lately." I stared at her, my heart filled with bitterness. "Easy?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call it? My brother is gone, and you're sitting here pretending that everything is normal?" She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. "I miss him too, Samantha," she said softly, "but we have to move on. We can't let grief consume us." "Move on?" I exclaimed, pulling my hand away from hers. "How can you move on when you know that Richard is responsible for what happened?" She shook her head, her face pale. "Don't say that," she whispered. "Richard would never do anything to hurt Michael." "He already did," I said, my voice rising. "I have proof. I know what he did." I told her about the surveillance photos, the USB drive, the evidence of Richard's illegal activities. I watched her face as I spoke, her expression shifting from disbelief to horror. When I finished, she sat there in stunned silence, her eyes wide with shock. "I don't believe you," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Richard would never do such things." "You're choosing to believe him over your own son," I said, my voice filled with contempt. "How can you be so blind?" She stood up and walked to the door, her back to me. "I need time to think," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, Samantha, don't do anything rash." She left the room, closing the door softly behind her. I sat there on my bed, my body numb, my heart filled with despair. I had hoped that my mother would see the truth, that she would finally break free from Richard's control. But she was too far gone, too deeply entrenched in his web of lies. I was truly alone. I had reached rock bottom. I was broken, betrayed, and utterly alone. But even in the depths of my despair, a spark of resolve flickered within me. I would not let Richard get away with what he had done.
I would not let Michael's end go unavenged. I would make them pay. I would expose their lies, their deceit, their crimes. I would tear down their empire, brick by brick. And I would do it all myself. The victim was gone. The planner had arrived. The following days were a blur of calculated action. I knew I couldn't rush things. Patience was my greatest weapon. I continued to play the role of the grieving, naive daughter, all the while meticulously gathering evidence and solidifying my plan. My first step was to ensure I had irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be dismissed as the ramblings of a heartbroken girl. I discreetly backed up all the files from Richard's USB drive onto multiple secure cloud servers, using encrypted connections and anonymous proxy servers to mask my location. I even created a dead man switch. If anything happened to me, the files would automatically be released to several news organizations and law enforcement agencies. I wasn't going down without a fight. Next, I needed to understand the full extent of Richard's illegal activities. I spent hours researching corporate law, forensic accounting, and cybercrime, educating myself on the intricacies of his schemes. I learned how to trace money laundering operations, identify shell corporations, and uncover hidden assets. The more I learned, the more disgusted I became. Richard's greed knew no bounds. I started documenting everything, recording every conversation with Richard and my mother, transcribing every email, and photographing every document. I knew that these recordings could be crucial in building a case against him. I purchased a miniature voice recorder that could easily be concealed in my clothing, and I used it to capture Richard's every word. I even installed a hidden camera in his office, disguised as a smoke detector, to monitor his activities when I wasn't around. The risks were immense, but the potential reward was worth it. I also began to investigate Richard's past, digging into his background, searching for any skeletons in his closet. I discovered that he had a history of shady business dealings, of manipulating and exploiting others for his own gain. He had left a trail of broken lives in his wake, people who had been ruined by his greed and ambition.
I contacted some of these people, offering them anonymity and protection in exchange for their stories. Their accounts corroborated my own suspicions, painting a clear picture of Richard as a ruthless and unscrupulous individual. One former business partner revealed that Richard had once bragged about his ability to make problems disappear, a chilling admission that sent a shiver down my spine. As I delved deeper into Richard's world, I realized that I was walking a tightrope. One wrong move could expose me and jeopardize my entire plan. There were several close calls. One afternoon, Richard came into my room unexpectedly while I was working on my laptop. I quickly minimized the incriminating files and pretended to be writing an essay for school. He eyed me suspiciously, asking me what I was doing. I stammered, telling him that I was just catching up on my studies. He didn't seem convinced, but he eventually left, warning me not to spend too much time on the computer. After he left, I immediately changed my passwords and moved the sensitive files to a more secure location. Another time, my mother found the miniature voice recorder in my laundry basket. She picked it up, examining it curiously, asking me what it was. I panicked, telling her that it was a toy that Michael had given me. She seemed to accept my explanation, but I knew that I had to be more careful. I started concealing the recorder in more discreet locations, such as inside my jewelry box or under my mattress. The anticipation of the final strike was almost unbearable. I spent countless nights lying awake in bed, replaying the events in my mind, visualizing the moment when I would expose Richard and bring him to justice. I knew that it would be a risky and dangerous undertaking, but I was prepared to do whatever it took. I had nothing to lose. Michael's end demanded justice, and I was determined to deliver it. I decided to use Richard's upcoming charity gala as the venue for my exposé. It was a high-profile event, attended by the city's elite, including politicians, business leaders, and media personalities. It was the perfect stage to reveal Richard's true colors to the world. I planned to create a presentation, using the evidence I had gathered, to expose his crimes and his involvement in Michael's suspicious passing. I would project the presentation onto a large screen during the gala, ensuring that everyone in attendance would see it. I also planned to send copies of the presentation to various news organizations and law enforcement agencies, guaranteeing that the story would receive widespread coverage. To ensure the success of my plan, I needed to enlist the help of a few trusted allies. I contacted a former classmate, David, who was studying computer science at a local university. David was a brilliant hacker, and I knew that he could help me with the technical aspects of my plan, such as gaining access to the gala's audio-visual system and ensuring that my presentation would run smoothly.
I explained the situation to David, telling him about Richard's crimes and his role in Michael's suspicious passing. David was shocked and outraged, and he immediately offered to help. He spent the next few weeks working tirelessly on the technical aspects of the plan, ensuring that everything would go off without a hitch. I also contacted a private investigator, Sarah, who had previously worked with Michael on several cases. Sarah was a tough and resourceful woman, and I knew that she could help me with the security aspects of my plan, such as protecting me from Richard's potential retaliation and ensuring that I could safely leave the gala after the exposé. I explained the situation to Sarah, and she agreed to help, offering her expertise and resources to ensure my safety. With David and Sarah by my side, I felt confident that my plan would succeed. The day of the gala was rapidly approaching, and I was ready to unleash my revenge. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The charity gala arrived like a storm cloud, thick with anticipation and dread. I spent the afternoon meticulously preparing, ensuring every detail was perfect. David had managed to infiltrate the gala's audio-visual system, planting a program that would override their scheduled content with my presentation at a designated time. Sarah had arranged for a discreet security team to be on standby, ready to extract me from the venue if things went south. As I dressed for the evening, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The months of planning, the sleepless nights, the constant fear, it was all coming to a head. I knew that tonight would change everything. I chose a simple black dress, elegant but understated, not wanting to draw too much attention to myself before the storm hit. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The naive, grieving girl was gone, replaced by a woman hardened by betrayal and driven by revenge. At the gala, I circulated through the crowd, playing the part of the dutiful daughter, smiling and making small talk with Richard's colleagues and acquaintances. My mother hovered nearby, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and suspicion. I could feel her watching me, trying to decipher my intentions. But I gave nothing away. I was a mask of composure, hiding the tempest raging beneath the surface. Richard, of course, was in his element, basking in the attention of his admirers, his ego inflated by the fawning praise. He moved through the room like a king, shaking hands, patting backs, and dispensing empty promises.
I watched him, my heart filled with contempt, knowing that his reign was about to end. As the evening progressed, I made my way to the audio-visual control room where David was waiting. He gave me a reassuring nod, confirming that everything was ready. The program was set to run in exactly 15 minutes during Richard's keynote speech. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to happen. This was it. I returned to the main ballroom and positioned myself near the stage, where Richard was preparing to speak. He stepped up to the podium, a smug grin on his face, and began his address. He spoke of his accomplishments, his philanthropy, his vision for the future. The crowd listened attentively, hanging on his every word. I could feel my anger building, a molten core of rage threatening to erupt. How dare he stand there, preening and pontificating, when he was nothing but a fraud, a criminal, a person who ended my brother? As he reached the climax of his speech, I gave David the signal. He pressed a button, and the program was activated. Suddenly, the screen behind Richard flickered, and his image was replaced by the opening slide of my presentation, a photograph of Michael, smiling and full of life. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Richard froze, his face turning pale, his eyes wide with confusion and alarm. He tried to regain control, stammering into the microphone, but his voice was drowned out by the rising murmur of the audience. The next slide appeared, a montage of surveillance photos, documenting Richard's secret meetings, his shady deals, his every move. The crowd gasped again, this time louder, more shocked. People began to whisper, pointing and staring at Richard, their faces filled with disbelief. He tried to speak, to deny the accusations, but the evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. The presentation continued, each slide revealing a new layer of Richard's deceit and corruption. Financial records, contracts, emails, all laid bare for the world to see. The crowd was in an uproar, a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and shouts. Richard stood there, paralyzed, his empire crumbling before his eyes. Then came the final slide, the email detailing Richard's plan to silence Michael, to make his end look like an accident. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a stunned silence. All eyes were on Richard, their faces filled with disgust and outrage. My mother stood beside him,
her face ashen, her eyes wide with horror. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. I met her gaze, my eyes filled with cold fury. There was no turning back now. As the presentation ended, I stepped onto the stage, grabbing the microphone from Richard's trembling hand. "The man you see before you is a liar, a cheat, and a person who ended my brother," I said, my voice ringing through the silent ballroom. "He has betrayed your trust, stolen your money, and ruined countless lives. He must be brought to justice."
I paused, letting my words sink in, then turned to Richard, my eyes burning with hatred. "Your time is up," I said. "It's over." Before Richard could react, Sarah's security team moved in, surrounding him and leading him away. The crowd erupted in cheers, applauding my courage and condemning Richard's crimes. My mother stood there, frozen in place, her world shattered. As I left the stage, I felt a sense of exhilaration, a wave of liberation washing over me. I had done it. I had exposed Richard, avenged Michael, and reclaimed my life. But I knew that the battle was far from over. As I approached the exit, I saw a figure emerge from the crowd, blocking my path. It was Richard's lawyer, a slick and menacing man with a predatory smile. "I wouldn't celebrate just yet, Samantha," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "This is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning." The lawyer's words hung in the air, a chilling promise of retaliation. I knew he was right. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new battle. But I was ready. I had anticipated Richard's counterattack, and I had prepared accordingly. As I stepped out of the gala, the flashing lights of news cameras assaulted me. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, desperate for a statement. Sarah's security team formed a protective barrier, shielding me from the chaos. We made our way to a waiting car, and I was whisked away to a safe house, a secure location where I could lie low while the storm raged. Inside, I found David, his face pale but relieved. "That was insane," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't believe it actually worked." I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in months. "We did it, David," I said. "We exposed him." But there was no time for celebration. I knew that Richard would be scrambling to cover his tracks, to silence me, to salvage what was left of his empire. I needed to stay one step ahead. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The news of Richard's exposure spread like wildfire, dominating headlines around the world. His company's stock plummeted, his business partners deserted him, and his political allies distanced themselves. He was a pariah, shunned by everyone who had once flocked to him. Law enforcement agencies launched investigations into his financial dealings, his past business ventures, and his possible involvement in Michael's suspicious passing. The evidence I had provided was irrefutable, and the authorities were closing in fast. Richard, desperate to regain control, launched a smear campaign against me, accusing me of being a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge, of fabricating evidence, of conspiring to ruin him. His lawyer filed lawsuits against me, against the news organizations that had published my story, against anyone who dared to speak out against him. But it was too late. The truth was out, and nothing could stop it. Then came the attempt on my life. I was staying at the safe house, working with my lawyers to prepare for the legal battles ahead when it happened. A team of armed men stormed the house, their faces masked, their intentions clear. Sarah's security team fought them off, engaging in a fierce gun battle. I was rushed into a panic room, a secure bunker where I would be safe from harm. The sound of gunfire and explosions echoed through the house, a terrifying reminder of the danger I was in. After what seemed like an eternity, the fighting stopped. Sarah's team had managed to repel the attackers, but several of them were wounded. I emerged from the panic room, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I knew that Richard was behind the attack, that he was willing to do anything to silence me, even if it meant violence. But I refused to be intimidated. I would not be silenced. The final blow came a few weeks later. Richard was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he had no way to deny it. He was denied bail and remanded in custody, awaiting trial. As he was led away in handcuffs, he looked at me, his eyes filled with rage and defeat. I met his gaze, my eyes filled with contempt. "It's over, Richard," I said. "You lost." The trial was a media circus, with every detail of Richard's crimes laid bare for the world to see. Witnesses testified against him, including former business partners, employees, and even members of his own family.
The evidence was damning, and the jury had no choice but to convict him on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. His empire was gone, his reputation ruined, his life destroyed. My mother, devastated by Richard's betrayal and crimes, filed for divorce and cooperated with the authorities in their investigation. She was spared prosecution, but was ostracized by her social circle, left to live with the consequences of her choices. In the end, justice was served. Michael's suspicious passing was re-examined, and the truth was finally revealed. Richard had orchestrated it, hiring someone to make him disappear after Michael discovered his illegal activities. The person responsible was apprehended and brought to justice. I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed Richard, avenged Michael, and reclaimed my life. I had torn down their empire, brick by brick. They lost everything. I just smiled. The lawyer's threats became empty echoes. His attempts to intimidate me, to silence me, had failed. I had won. In the aftermath, I reflected on the events that had led me to this point. The betrayal, the grief, the anger, they had all consumed me, driving me to the brink of despair. But they had also given me strength, resilience, and an unwavering determination to seek justice. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary.
It's about holding people accountable for their actions, about standing up for what's right, about protecting the innocent. It's about ensuring that no one else suffers the same fate as Michael. I found some semblance of peace, knowing I had honored my brother's memory and brought his tormentors to justice. The scars of the past would always remain, but I was ready to move forward, to build a new life, to find happiness again. The darkness had lifted, and the future was bright.
Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.